Hello, thank you for joining us. I'm Donavan from Salt of the Streets. This is the review preview for April and May. Our April book is Rubicon by Tom Holland, or Spider-Man as we called him in the live streams. And our May book is The Coddling of the American Mind by Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff. If that's not how you pronounce your name, I'm sorry, sir. We respect you here. So we're going to start with the review for Rubicon. And the way that we're going to tackle this, I'm not going to tell the story of this book. The names are too complicated. Colin and I were just talking about it. Cato, Cicero, Caesar, all of these people interacting together, all in the same time, fighting each other, helping each other. It's too much for me to try and keep track of, and there's no way that I would be able to tell the story accurately. So, if you didn't read this whole book, which I can't imagine why you wouldn't have, or if you just happen to stumble across this content because you're watching some of our other stuff, I would highly recommend reading this book. Rubicon, as we talked about, was $19 US when I got it. It might be a little bit more now, inflation, stuff like that. I don't know. If you buy it on Amazon, then of course it's probably going to be less than that because that's how Amazon does things. We've talked about that in one of the previous review previews. It's weird, but it is what it is. So let's start here. First, what we're going to do is we're going to discuss the story itself, right? Not breaking it down, but kind of the things that I drew from it and the things that I found very interesting. And then we're going to talk about some of the strings that I drew from those ideas to America itself. I'm going to talk about some of the large ideas that I drew from it, and then we'll talk about some of the smaller details. You can take what you want from it, discount what you will. You know, we had some of the comments on one of our IG videos that didn't like the comparison that I drew from dancing. I will talk more about that and explain it a little bit more, but you don't have to, and I wouldn't recommend drawing one of these tiny ideas and saying, well, this couldn't possibly be leading to the destruction of America, because that's not my argument, is that any of these small details is leading to the destruction of America, but they are all individually playing a role in the larger event of the destruction of this republic. And if we don't do something to adjust it and to get ourselves away from this, then we are dooming ourselves. So let's talk about this story. As we talked about in, I think, the first and probably the second of the live streams, also we had one less live stream this month because I put myself in a raw position of reading this book, but we talked about the core of Roman society is pride in Rome. And the best way for people to exemplify that is to do incredible things themselves, right? But it always bears this undertone of, and in a positive way, of what you're doing while you are progressing your own status. You're bringing yourself to a higher status all the time. You're doing it for Rome. All of it is to increase the image of the society itself as a whole. That's always the goal, is to make Rome better through your own achievements. I think what stood out to me the most about that idea is the leaders of Rome that stuck strongest to that ideal, to that core ideal of progressing Rome itself, are the ones that did the best. And the leaders that always wanted to progress Rome itself and also brought in kind of the plebes with themselves and got the support of the plebes are the ones that really, really did the best, right? And one thing that started to stand out to me more as the story went on is the disdain that the Senate had for anybody that wasn't in that class. Even anybody of what do they call them, the tribunes that were elected from the regular people, right? The senators did not see them even on the same level as them. Even though they could pass legislation, they had all of these enormous powers. They were enormous political figures, the tribunes were, and the senators still looked down on them because they were of the people. Even consuls or other senators who had got their, what they call them, like publii, I think is what they called them, senators or figures who got their status, who got their position by support of the citizens of Rome. They looked down on you. If you didn't get there by your own means, quote unquote, or technically by being pushed by other senators or other people of status into your position, then they were looking down on you, which is it's very weird, you know? And I think one of the reasons that stood out to me is I compared some of these more populist, the publii figures to like a Donald Trump, right? And that's kind of where I personally see that he gets his power from, right? And we've talked about that. Donald Trump's power is in the crowds that he draws. His support is an enormous base of people that he's either able to gather around him. And, you know, if you ask the Democrats, he's able to get them to storm the Capitol. You know, he has all kinds of power like this, but it's because he appeals to the common man. That's always been Donald Trump's thing. And that's what the most influential people of Rome did the exact same thing. If you're talking about Sulla, Caesar, we can just stick with those two because those are kind of the biggest ones in this book. But there are other figures as well that when they gained their status through support of the citizens, those are the people that did the best, succeeded the longest, achieved the highest status. Sulla was dictator for like 5 years, I think. Caesar for an incredible amount of time. Octavian for 40 years or something like that. So a good counter example to this idea is Crassus, right? Continuously focused on himself, and eventually that pushed him into his own peril, right? So I have two readings that I have here. One of them is going to be about the Roman pride itself, and then we'll talk a little bit about Crassus, right? I have a reading that will kind of underline what I'm talking about there. So let's see, go to page. Privileges of birth then guaranteed nothing in Rome. The fact that the descendants of a goddess might find themselves living in a red light district ensured that it was not only the very poor who dreaded the consequences of failure. At every social level, the life of a citizen was a grueling struggle to emulate and, if possible, surpass the achievements of his ancestors. In practice as well as principle, the Republic was savagely meritocratic. Indeed, this, to the Romans, was what liberty meant. It appeared self-evident to them that the entire course of their history had been an evolution away from slavery, toward a freedom based on the dynamics of perpetual competition. The proof of the superiority of this model of society lay in its trouncing of every conceivable alternative. The Romans knew that they had remained the slaves of a monarch or of a self-perpetually clique of aristocrats. They would never have succeeded in conquering the world. It is almost beyond belief how great the Republic's achievements were once the people had gained their liberty. Such was the longing for glory which it lit in every man's heart. Even the crustiest patrician had to acknowledge this. The upper classes may have sniffed at the plebes and the unwashed rabble, but it is still possible for them to idealize an abstract, and therefore safely odorless, Roman people. So what that underlines is that anyone from the plebes, like they said, the lowest members of Roman society, all the way up to the senators, the consuls, the proconsuls, if you had control of a certain district within Rome, everyone is trying to surpass the legacy of the ancestors before them, but always to benefit Rome. Okay, so now I'm going to read a little piece about Crassus and how his inability, and it will underline how his unwillingness or inability to maintain Rome and Roman society as his focus led to his downfall, right? And also him being kind of a piece of shit. In the years following Sulla's death, although he was yet to win the praetorship, still less become consul, there were those who regarded Crassus as already closing in on that ambition. The argument with Sulla had proven only a limited setback. Indeed, in some ways it had served to enhance Crassus's prestige. Unlike Catullus, he stood at a remove from the dictator's regime. This is how he preferred to operate, without ties or obligation to any cause except his own. Principles, to Crassus, were merely gambits in a vast and complex game to be adopted, then sacrificed as strategy required. Rather than risk leaving his finger marks on anything, he employed proxies to test the limits on his behalf. Of such willing dependents, he had an endless supply. Crassus was assiduous to cultivating men on the make, whether he wished to help promote them to high office or merely have them serve him as patsies or ciphers. He would treat them all with the same menacing geniality, keeping open house, avoiding heirs, remembering the name of anyone he ever met. In the law courts, he would tirelessly plead for defendants who might later provide him with a return. A debt taken out with Crassus always came with heavy interest. And it says at the end of this previous paragraph, the sentence, I should have read this here, and what Marcus Crassus wanted was, to be clear, to be the leading citizen in the state, right? He wanted his own status, not for Rome to be better, for his own status. And it says there, right, that his principles to him, they're just tools. He's willing to adopt them and move them, and that is exemplified many times throughout the story. He is eventually part of the triumvirate only because he has the most money. He has the most money in anybody of Rome. And when he is part of the triumvirate, he dies chasing after people in the desert, right? He goes into Africa to try and chase down a horde. I don't remember the people that he's trying to chase down, but they end up killing him. They murder him in the desert because he's chasing after his own glory. He wants to be greater than Caesar, who has spent, I think at this point, like 7 years or something like that, already involved in the Gallic Wars and these enormous campaigns in Gaul to try and take it, quash down the civil wars and all this type of stuff. Crassus wants status. He wants to be the strongest part of the triumvirate, not just have power, not have a third, not have whatever is going to work out with this. He wants to be the highest. That leads to his death, right? We see that, to me, I saw it throughout this story. The people that get too focused, even Caesar, and we'll talk about this next, even Caesar, when he stops and loses focus on Rome, and he's focused on his own conquests, what he wants to do, he's focused on fucking Cleopatra, when he's focused on those things, the people of Rome feel that he has forgotten about them, and he no longer has their favor. When he returns from Alexandria, from killing Pompey, or not killing Pompey, he watches Pompey be killed in Alexandria, but when he returns from this mission over there, and he's with Cleopatra and all this stuff, the Roman people don't like him anymore. They're not here for it. And it's shortly after that he's killed in the Senate. It's very shortly after that. So, okay, so we'll talk about Sulla for a quick moment, right? Sulla is the first dictator that's discussed in this book, right? And Sulla is on a war campaign with Mithridates, right? Yeah, that's what he is. The campaign against Mithridates, who's the king of this, and they're sieging the city of Nola. And while he is actively sieging the city of Nola, Marius, who has come out of retirement, wants the consulship, I believe, wins the consulship while Sulla is conducting this campaign. And Marius then convinces the Senate to pass legislation stripping Sulla of his command of this siege and gives it to Marius. When that happens, they send a messenger from Rome to Sulla's campaign, to the war camp. The messenger is killed. The soldiers then immediately turn to Sulla, according to history, right? Immediately then turn to Sulla and tell him they want to march on Rome. They take this as an affront to his leadership, to what the people of Rome want, because Sulla is popular among the people of Rome. The citizens of Rome are fans of Sulla. The senators do not like him. They don't like the campaigns. They don't like the control that he has. They don't like that he has power over the citizens because they know how dangerous that is, especially now that he has this enormously successful campaign against Mithridates, right? So he leaves one, what do they call that? A legion. They leave one legion there to continue the siege against Nola. They've already cut it off and stuff like that, and they march on Rome. This, in the eyes of Sulla and in the eyes of his soldiers, is to save the Republic. And it is said many, many times when dictators are taken up in the Republic, it is because the Republic is sick. The Republic is sick and it needs medicine, and a dictator is that medicine. That's a crazy thought to me here in America, but it is what it is, right? So Sulla goes, and it is only when the Senate turns on the people of Rome in his eyes that he goes and seizes power of Rome. So this is a small reading that I have here about Sulla and his dictatorship, right? And in my opinion, and I think lending to my point, it is, and let me preface with this, right? We have to remember, and I think this is a really interesting point that Dan Carlin actually made when he was talking about this Gallic campaign. And he was talking specifically about Caesar, but this lends itself to any leader probably in history, but in Rome specifically, right? When we're talking about this, we have to consider the different levels in which those leaders are considering and thinking when they're writing things down. And so Caesar was the example because Caesar is obviously an extremely intelligent individual. So we know that when Caesar is writing things about the Gallic campaign, he's writing them not only to make himself look better, he also wants the story to be told. But if he can make himself look a little bit better, then he's going to do that. He also knows that the writings that he's doing are going to be used as political fodder back in Rome. So that's another level that he's looking at. He also figures, we have to assume that he's figuring that whatever he's writing is also going to be read in the future. So he's also considering how other people are going to look at him, not just now, but in the future. And we don't know what he expected the future to look like. So while it is likely that the majority of what they're writing is true because they want the actual story to be told, there's definitely some liberties taken when people are writing history. And so that's, I think, one of the things that makes stories like this so interesting is that historians were so enormous at the time, and some of them became very famous, and poets and stuff like that were writing enormous epics that were keeping in history the stories of some of these campaigns and stuff like that. So I say this to say, with a lot of kind of asterisks around it, that in my opinion, it is Sulla's eventual re-grasping or re-entering of Republican ideals that saves him from being murdered, that saves him from being assassinated. Because as we learned, as Colin and I just talked about, he eventually lives a life, he dies naturally after retirement, right? After Sulla is dictator for, I think, 5 years, eventually he steps down. He has consular elections almost immediately after taking power. And I say with the asterisks because he does select who the candidates are. But because he even held those elections, it signals to everybody in Rome that he isn't going to stay in power forever, because that isn't his actual ideal. It signals to them that he really does, and signals to us that he really does believe that it is just for the time being, that this is the medicine that Rome needs to heal its sickness. So we're going to talk a little bit, read this piece about Sulla being dictator. This is from page 99. Sulla aimed to build as well as destroy. Even in the streets of Rome ran red, he talked loudly of restoring the republic to full health. As ever with him, opportunism was the obverse of an icy conviction. The cycle of wars and revolutions through which he had hacked his way so savagely had done nothing to diminish his deeply held conservatism. Sulla had the true patrician's contempt for innovation. Far from wishing to impose some radical new model of autocracy on his fellow citizens, he looked to the past for solutions to the crisis facing Rome. Most urgently of all, he faced the need to regularize his own position. Even with his enemies proscribed, Sulla still refused to submit himself to judgment of the voters. Fortunately, a precedent for this lay conveniently close to hand. The Republic's ancient history did indeed provide examples of citizens who had wielded absolute power without being elected. In moments of particular crisis, the authority of the consuls had sometimes been suspended and a single magistrate nominated to take control of the state. Such an office fitted Sulla's requirements perfectly. The fact that it was a constitutional fossil worried him not in the slightest. By dropping heavy and menacing hints, he persuaded the Senate to dust off the antiquated office and appoint him to it. The result was not only to legalize his supremacy, but to give it to the patina of tradition. After all, how could the Romans consider themselves threatened by a magistracy as authentically republican as the dictatorship? In fact, though it had always been regarded with suspicion, unlike the consulship, split as it was between two citizens of equal rank, the unified powers of the dictatorship were inherently offensive to Republican ideals. This is why the office had fallen into abeyance. Even back in the dark days of war against Hannibal, citizens had been appointed to it for only a very short fixed periods. Like unmixed wine, the dictatorship had a taste that was intoxicating and perilous. Sulla, now, however, who joined alcohol and power equally, was proud of it. Sulla, however, who enjoyed alcohol and power equally, was proud of his head for both. He refused to accept a limit on his term for office. Instead, he was to remain dictator until the constitution had been revised. What this might mean he would judge for himself. A consul had 12 lictors. Sulla had 24. Each one bore on his shoulder not only fasces, but also bundled up with the scourging rods and symbolizing a dictator's powers of life and death, an axe. Nothing could better have indicated the disproportion in status now existing between Sulla and his fellow magistrates. He was quick to ram home the message. No sooner had he been appointed dictator than he ordered consular elections to be held. Both the candidates were selected by himself. When one of his own generals, the war hero who had captured Praeneste, no less, attempted to stand, Sulla warned him to back off, and then when he refused, had him murdered publicly in the forum. More than anyone, Sulla had reason to appreciate just how dangerous war heroes had become. So, that's why I say that, right? He still had obvious influence on what was happening, but he was still signaling to the people. Even though I'm not going to tell you how long I'm going to be here, I am telling you that there's precedent for it. And if you want to decide how long I should be here, then you should amend the Constitution, and also signaling that he would abide by that amendment. This is a lot of hopeful thinking, right? But at least, I don't know, I don't want to argue for him, right? But at least he's being honest. At least he seems to be being honest and relatively transparent of, if this is how you want it to happen, this is what needs to be done. I appreciate the transparency. And again, I think, because I'm a historical expert now that I've read this one book, I think that's what saved him. I think that is what saved his life, and what allowed him to step back is the fact that he was still willing to signal to the people of Rome, that he was going to stick with those Republican ideals. And people recognized, as in this book, that he was still conservative. He still held those ideals. So, now we can talk a little bit about Caesar. And we're going to condense, for the purposes of this video, we're going to condense a lot of this down to a very, very short period, right? Caesar had, I believe, 15 years of being the proconsul of Rome. Shortly after he became consul, he was dictator for like 5 or 10 days so that he could expedite some other people into offices. The triumvirate was established between Pompey, Caesar, and Crassus was kind of funding the whole thing. Pompey was one of the consuls back in Rome. Caesar was the other consul, immediately placed into a proconsulship over the entire section, what do they call it, district of Gaul, right? And in his time there, before he becomes consul, he has already conducted a lengthy campaign in Gaul. He has already done a whole lot of work there, trying to pacify, quote unquote, in his terms, the barbarians there in toga-wearing Gaul and short-haired Gaul and all these things, all these different territories they're referring to. And then eventually, when he goes back to Rome, he becomes consul, he has to go back to Gaul because all of these different factions have arose, anti-Caesarian factions have arisen. He has to go back and try and fight these civil wars to pacify Gaul again. So after he does this, while he is doing this, all of this is still regarded as positive for Rome. In the beginning, he's expanding Roman territory. He is just gaining more and more ground for Rome. And there are obviously people who are questioning him in Rome. Is he doing this really for Rome, or does he really just want, his own power? Obviously, he's getting extremely rich while he's there. He has insane debts in Rome, so there's always question about that. Is he doing it for his own financial benefits? Is he doing it because he wants Rome to be great? Obviously, no one knows for sure. You have to imagine. You don't have to. I imagine that he does bear that nationalist ideal that is in there, because I don't know how you can stay that long in power. I don't know. Maybe that's a silly thing to think. I'm not going to qualify it with any of those details. That's what I think. I think that he did have that nationalist ideal inside him, that he wanted Rome to be powerful, because it seems like, to me, that is the consistent theme that made people have long-standing rules in this society. So maybe it's just so that I feel like I'm right about what I'm saying, but that is what I believe. So it is only after Caesar comes back to Rome, whatever time it is, and he starts beefing with Pompey, and he's beefing with Crassus. Crassus in Africa, and Crassus dies, and then he's beefing directly with Pompey, and he comes back, he crosses the Rubicon, and that's what this book is about, right? Bum, bum, bum. Yeah, he crosses the Rubicon. Pompey freaks out. Pompey tries to run to Alexandria. He tries to run to Greece, right? And he ends up in Alexandria. As soon as Pompey gets onto the shore, the king is there waiting for him, because he's been waiting in the sea for a while. People have gone and already touched the king. The king is waiting for him. Other people are there. He gets stabbed immediately as it comes onto shore. Immediately. He is killed. He's struck down. People are hacking him at him with swords. It's horrific. He gets left there. His wife sees it from the boat. Everyone sees it. They're like, okay, we're out of here. So once Caesar gets to Alexandria, obviously, as we know, he becomes infatuated with Cleopatra. One of the crazy things that I learned from this book, and maybe I knew it before, so maybe I relearned it. Caesar pisses everybody off pretty much in Alexandria because he is kind of a dick. He expects a lot of respect that people aren't willing to give him, because the Egyptians don't really think that much of the Romans. It is what it is. So Caesar takes up a place to stay in the palace with the king. And at this time, the king is beefing with his sister Cleopatra. Cleopatra is having to stay outside of the city of Alexandria. Caesar hears about her beauty. He wants her to be brother. So Caesar is staying inside of the palace. He has, this is real, he has a merchant. And Cleopatra obviously had a hand in this, but she gets rolled up into a rug and brought to his room in the palace by a merchant. And they bang, and she gets pregnant with his son, and then she's there, and it becomes evident that she's pregnant. Her brother freaks out. He flees the palace, tries to go across the Nile, is weighted down by the gold armor that he's wearing, and drowns in the Nile. And that is how Cleopatra gained power in Alexandria. I swear to God, that is how it happened, right? So after this time, there are civil wars going on in Rome. That's a crazy story, though. There are civil wars going on in throughout the enormous territories of Rome. In Caesar's absence, people are trying to quell other uprisings that are happening there. There are pro-Pompeian regimes that are standing up in smaller kingdoms and stuff like that are trying to fight the Caesarian regimes that are still there, the Caesarian legions that are still there, and the pro-Caesarian forces. And for some reason, I say that because the historians are kind of split on it, Caesar lulls in Alexandria for a few months. He stays there with Cleopatra. He has a good time. He explores. They go on trips. They bang a lot. They're just having a good time. And in this time, there was already a question of whether or not he cares about Rome. Because by the time that he's going to Alexandria and he is chasing down Pompey, there are a lot of people that say it seems pretty evident that this isn't just about Rome. Because there is a split in Rome itself on Pompey. And it is in this time that he lulls in Alexandria that people really, really don't feel like he cares about them anymore. And that is where this reading comes in. This starts on page 331. And specifically, like Alexandria, there had been an early hint that this might be so in Caesar's choice of houseguest. In September 46 BC, just in time to watch her lover's triumph, Cleopatra had swept into town, ensconcing herself in Caesar's mansion on the far side of the Tiber. She had refused to make any allowances for Republican sensibilities, instead playing up the role of Egyptian queen to the full. And so this particular reading is from after Caesar has come back to Rome, but it explains the sentiment that while he was in Alexandria, the disdain for him started to grow in Rome. She not only brought her husband, brother, and an entourage of eunuchs with her, but also had an heir to her parade, a 1-year-old prince. Caesar, already married, had refused to acknowledge his bastard son, but Cleopatra, nothing daunted, had flaunted the obvious by naming the boy Caesaron. Naturally, Rome was scandalized. Equally naturally, everyone who was anyone flocked across the Tiber to gape. The manner in which Cleopatra greeted visitors reflected her estimation of whether they mattered. Cicero, for instance, who found her hateful, she roundly snubbed. Effectively, of course, the queen had eyes for only one man. In August 45, when Caesar finally returned to Italy, she hurried off to meet him. The two of them luxuriated together on vacation in the countryside. Only in October did Caesar finally return to Rome. And so that's what I'm saying. Even before then, he hasn't actually returned to Rome yet. He chills on the countryside. Before then, she meets up with him. They kick it there for longer before he goes back to the capital. He found a city convulsed by wild gossip. It was said and believed that he planned to move the seat of empire to Alexandria. Less ludicrously, it was also claimed that he wished to marry Cleopatra, despite the fact that he had already had a wife. Caesar himself did nothing to discount these rumors by setting up a golden statue of his mistress in the temple of Venus, an unprecedented and shocking honor. And since Venus was the goddess most closely identified with Isis, there was a hint here in an even greater and more ominous scandal. This is obviously not Isis. Isis. This is the goddess Isis. If Cleopatra were to be represented in the heart of the Republic as a goddess, then what plans did her lovers have for himself? And exactly why were workmen adding a pediment to the mansion as though it were a temple? And what was the truth of the rumor that Antony had been appointed his high priest? Caesar was hardly being reticent in scattering out clues. Goddess brides and self-deification. He knew that his fellow citizens were bound to be appalled, but there were others, particularly in the East, who would not be. Rome might have bowed to Caesar, but there were still parts of the globe that had not yet bowed to Rome. Most obdurate of these were Parthia, whose horsemen, taking advantage of the Republic's civil war, had dared to cross the frontier into Syria. There was also Carrhae, to avenge, of course, and the lost eagles to regain, responsibility certainly worthy of the dictator's attention. Carrhae is actually where Crassus was killed. That is the campaign that he was going on. Him and all of his legions were killed in the desert or taken captive. That's what they're referencing. Yet, coming soon after his return to Rome, Caesar's plan to set off to war again could not help but leave the city feeling diminished, almost spurned. It was as though the problems of the Republic bored the man appointed to solve them, as though Rome herself were now too small a stage for his ambitions. In the East, they would appreciate this. In the East, they had already worshipped Caesar as a god. In the East, there were traditions older by far than the Republic, of the flesh becoming divine and the rule of a king of kings. So, it is at that time, again, they're talking about there, that he's setting up statues of Cleopatra in the temples of Venus. He is starting to, it seems like he's looking upon himself as a god, which would mean he is putting himself above Rome. His ambitions are greater than Rome itself. What ambitions could you have greater than Rome? In the eyes of a Roman citizen, right? In the eyes of a senator, in the eyes of a tribune. What ambition could be greater than Rome? Nothing. It is then, shortly after that, that he is struck down. It's like 2 pages after that he's struck down. He's there. It's during the Ides of March. One of the senators tells him, hey, you should watch your back. The Ides of March. And he's like, bitch, I'm going to be fine. The Ides of March comes up that day. The morning is, and like, hey, you should be careful. And he said, the Ides of March are here, and nothing has happened. And the person he's talking to says, the day is not over. He leaves his house, goes to the Senate, and is fucking murdered. Because he doesn't care about Rome anymore. Okay, so after Caesar falls, there's a struggle for power. Eventually, there's a second triumvirate that comes about, and his son, quote unquote, there's multiple names over this time. Octavius is his original name. He then becomes Octavian Caesar. Eventually, he becomes Augustus Caesar. And I learned from this book that the term Augustus is rooted in the term August, with like gusto, with vigor and vim, and that's how Augustus Caesar had referenced Rome. And so he's given this title far down the line to exemplify exactly how closely aligned he is with the ideals of Rome, right? And that is only after Octavian reverts back to those ideals. For a long time, when he is trying to become the most powerful member of the triumvirate, he's focused on himself. People don't like him. They do not like him. The citizens of Rome don't like him. They're not throwing parades for him. God damn it. People don't like him. The citizens of Rome don't like him. They're not throwing parades for him when he comes back from campaigns. They're not celebrating him. He's not having Thanksgiving. He's not having feasts. He's not having any of this stuff. It is only after he returns to Rome, becomes sole dictator, and over time reverts back to the traditions of Rome. And that is why they continue to allow him to be the leader for this extended period of time. And eventually he says, we can kind of get back to these old ways, and the citizens there have become so resigned to that individual power, they don't even want him to step down. They're happy with their lives at that point. He has pacified kind of all of Rome. Most of the civil wars are essentially done with, and he's bringing things back to where they were. It is only then that he is accepted by the people of Rome. So I don't want to provide too many details about that, because that's a long story about Augustus Caesar himself. But I think it just kind of underlines, and if you read this book, which obviously most of you have, but if you haven't, I would recommend it again. I think it underlines my point that people who stuck to the core ideals of Rome, of making Rome better, of increasing the reputation of Rome, are the people that succeeded the most in their trials and tribulations, through their trials and tribulations. So these are kind of the big takeaways that I have from this story, the big picture takeaways, and we'll talk about some of the underlines that will fill in these gaps from what I already talked about, right? The big takeaways in regards to comparisons to America, right? As a country, as the next greatest republic after Rome, I think that we owe it to ourselves, and we talked about this in the last episode with Ivan and Zeke, we owe it to ourselves to be studying the last great republic before us and find out why it failed. Because there's probably going to be a lot of hints there into why our republic will fail. We owe it to ourselves to be learning about this. And the big distinctions, the big comparisons that I drew from this between Rome, the Republic of Rome, and the Republic of the United States. The further that we as Americans have moved away from American ideals of freedom, liberty, and limited government, the worse off we are. The worse off we are as individuals. The further we distill power to DC, the resentment and separation of powers grows, and the worse off we are. What I'm talking about is the more power that we cede away from states to DC, from states to federal senators, to federal representatives, as opposed to our own localized governments, the worse off we are. The more we focus on useless hobbies and expenses, internet trends, false oppression, instead of hard work and progress, the worse off we are. And I think that a lot of this is exemplified in what I just talked about, that Rome started to fail when people were too focused on themselves, when they were not focused on making the country greater. They started to fail. everything went downhill. So, some of the finer details that I drew from this, I have mentioned in some of the live streams and I mentioned last week. And you don't have to take these things as fact. It all comes with asterisks, right? But as I'm reading this book and they're talking about some of the small details that the citizens of Rome are seeing in their values eroding away, I saw immediate comparisons to where we are now, and I couldn't help but think that it meant something, right? The first one is the dancing, and I know that commenter on Instagram really didn't like this, but I was beyond intrigued that the Romans looked down on people who were dancing in public, that it was the trend of dancing that they were seeing as a degradation of their ideals. These people don't care about themselves. They don't care what they look like. They are fools. They are getting drunk in public. They are disrespecting this entire nation, right? I drew the immediate parallel to like the TikTok dance trends that we see now. And the reason that I say that is because people are making careers off of that. They're making careers off of showing most of their ass in a video for 20 seconds on TikTok. That doesn't add anything to America. That doesn't make our country better for people to be making money off of shaking their ass. And I'm not denigrating that career. If that's what you want to do, that's fine. But it doesn't add to the country. But it adds to your status on this platform. It adds to your social status. It adds to yourself and not to the nation. Not to the culture, only to yourself. And the other reason is we know, TikTok being a Chinese app, we know the algorithm works differently here than it does in China. The things that are being run and pumped up in the algorithm here are not what is being pumped up in China. And if it doesn't matter, right? If it doesn't matter, it doesn't have any effect on our country at all, then why aren't they doing it in China? Why aren't, even if those citizens aren't into it, why aren't they showing American ass-shaking videos in China if it doesn't do anything to your culture? Because it does. In China, they're showing fucking engineering videos and people building things and improving their country. That is what is popular on the algorithm in China. And on here, it is stupid trends and pranks and funny videos and things that we enjoy, but things that all cause us to also spend 2 hours on our phone watching videos instead of doing anything other than that. Anything positive that would add to ourselves, to the nation, to anything. We've talked about one of the things that's like I've posted a picture of me doing stitches, sutures, right? It would be just as easy for me to just be on my phone, just be scrolling instead of doing that. But it's also just as easy for me to not scroll and add to myself, which also adds to the society, because if something happens and I'm the only person around and someone needs stitches, I know how to do it because I wasn't sitting around on my goddamn phone the whole time. Another thing, and I think this is the only other example that I'll pull from this, and you guys can read this book if you want more, because I'm not going to take Spider-Man's job away from him, right? The other example is he talks a lot about these fish ponds, right? Seafood is obviously huge. They're right there on the sea, and so seafood is enormous. And the saltwater fish are the most sought after because they're the hardest to get, they're the hardest to keep around for the most time. And so people who have the most money start digging saltwater ponds into their properties, into their villas, right? They're extremely difficult to maintain. It's an enormous amount of manpower because there's no machinery, so you have to hire. You have to get slaves to come in and dig this big ass hole and then fill it with rocks and then also bring all of the water over in like buckets or some such shit because, it's like a 50 BC. So it takes an enormous amount of money and there's no benefit to it because the pond is only so big. And so you're only going to have so many fish. You can't farm fish out of a saltwater pond on your property. And so the Roman society starts to look down on these people because there's no benefit to it. It's only for self-aggrandizement that you are digging a saltwater pond to have fish there. And most of the fish they have in there aren't even like to eat most of the time. They're just because they're super extravagant fish. It's like someone having, an even worse version of someone having like a koi pond with enormous koi fish. Now it's for aesthetic and decoration and stuff like that. And in the original East, I'm sure that there are like other meanings for people having in their house and stuff like that I can't speak to. But this egregious, useless expense is something the society looks down on. I would compare that to I don't know, any number of things that we have here in America. People are buying cars and fucking going to space and stupid stuff that doesn't add to anything. You have so much money, you just start buying stuff. You just buy things, mega yachts where you have to have people tear down a bridge so that you can get it through this waterway. You just have so much money, you're not even adding to the society. You're not adding to the culture. You're only adding to yourself. And while there's no doubt that Jeff Bezos will have a space in the history books for the other things that he has done, as we look at him as a culture, people will promote him to the end because there are positive things to what he has done. But when I look at Jeff Bezos, I see the way that he spends his money, and it doesn't seem to me, and not just him, there are many other people. That's just the first person I picked because we're talking about the mega yacht, right? You're not adding to society. You're adding to yourself. You are not helping people with that enormous amount of wealth that you have. This type of stuff is leading to the destruction of our society. And if we don't do something about it, we're going to be doomed just like Rome was. Somebody who is stronger than us, who is more put together than us, is going to come and take us over. When you're spread too thin, like you could argue that America is now, someone takes advantage. And I'm not going to place in a claim of when or where that's going to happen or who it's going to be. But and I don't want to use the same trope of like history's going to repeat itself, but if we continue to make these same mistakes, literally the same mistakes, in my opinion, we are doomed to that same fate. And I would hate to see that happen in my lifetime for a completely selfish reason, in a counter Roman Republican ideology for selfish reasons. I don't want to live through that. I don't want to live through a time in which another nation invades America and takes us over because we don't have our shit together. I don't want to do that. So I think my parting message with this book, before we go to the preview, which would be a little bit shorter, my parting message would be learn about the Republic, add to society, add to culture, add to community, and add to yourself always with the undertone and intention of making this country better, right?
Insert JFK line.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Ask not what you can do for your country or what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country, right? That's it. I absolutely agree. And that doesn't mean being a civil servant. That doesn't mean being president. It doesn't mean you have to sign up for the military and die in a war somewhere, because I wouldn't suggest really anybody do that, especially when you're talking about, well, I don't want to get into that. I wouldn't suggest that anybody do that. But simple things like getting off of your phone and teaching yourself to do sutures adds to yourself and also adds to your community. It adds to your friends. Learning other things, taking time instead of being on your phone to read a book will add to yourself, and it adds to your culture. I can't tell you how many people with this book specifically in this month have told me, I just don't have time to read a book. I just don't have time. I just don't know how you have the time. That's stupid. That's a dumb thing to be saying. And that's a dumb thing to be saying. I don't agree with that. Make the time. You have to make the time. And this is a very like Tim Pool argument, of if you want it, if you really want it, then you will do it. You will make the time. You will find a way to do it. If you want to read a book, you will make the time to read a book. It was very difficult, but we talked about it before. I read a few pages at lunch. I read when I have any few spare moments of time at home. If I'm sitting on the couch and Dax is doing a puzzle and he doesn't ask me to help him do the puzzle, I will read until he wants me to do something with him. Sitting with him, talking to him, all those things. But if I have the moment, I will read a few pages. After he goes to bed, I'm reading. I'm not on my phone the whole time. I'm reading. You have to make the time. If you want it, you will make the time to do it. And I think that you all can do it. That brings us to our next point, because I believe it is only a weakness in mind that makes you think that you can't do it. This is a preview for the May book, the Salted Streets Book Club, and it is The Coddling of the American Mind, How Good Intentions and Bad Ideas Are Setting Up a Generation for Failure. Greg Lukianoff, Jonathan Haidt. So this book is one that I have heard a lot about. I've never read it before. That's why it's in the book club, but I've had it on my shelf, I think, since it came out. So there are many reviews on the back here from Michael Bloomberg, Neil deGrasse Tyson, Cornel West, Steven Pinker. So people across all spectrums, right? It's not just left or right. It's about the coddling of the American mind. So, we'll talk a little about Jonathan Haidt. I have the quick Wikipedia for them, and then we will do a quick reading from this book, and we will move on. So, Jonathan David Haidt is an American American social psychologist, professor of ethical leadership at New York University Stern School of Business, and author. His main areas of study are psychology of morality and moral emotions. Haidt's main scientific contributions come from the psychological field of moral foundations theory, holy shit, which attempts to explain the evolutionary origins of human moral reasoning on the basis of innate gut feelings rather than logical reason. The theory was later extended to explain the different moral reasoning and how they relate to political ideology, with different political orientations prioritizing different sets of morals. The research served as a foundation of future books on various topics. I'm here for it. He's written a few other books, 3 books for general audiences: The Happiness Hypothesis, Finding Modern Truth and Ancient Wisdom, Exploring the Relationship Between Ancient Philosophies and Modern Science, The Righteous Mind, Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion, and then The Coddling of the American Mind. So, we can now talk for a quick moment about Greg Lukianoff. Greg Lukianoff is the president of the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, or FIRE. He previously served as FIRE's first director of legal and public advocacy until he was appointed president in 2006. See, it's a really short life one. This says, born in Manhattan, New York City, Lukianoff is a graduate of American University and Stanford Law School. He has described himself as a pro-choice liberal and an atheist. Life. That's all you need to know about Greg Lukianoff. I fucking hate Wikipedia sometimes. His works. Lukianoff has published articles in the Los Angeles Times, the Boston Globe, Chronicle of Higher Education, The Atlantic, Inside Higher Ed, and the New York Post. His article in The Atlantic, The Coddling of the American Mind, discussed whether or not trigger warnings are harmful to college health. He is a blogger for the Huffington Post, and blogger, I feel like it's just a denigrative term. He's a blogger. He writes shit on the fucking internet. It's gross. I hate that. And served as a regular columnist for the Daily Journal of Los Angeles and San Francisco. Along with Harvey Silvergate and David A. French, Lukianoff is a co-author of FIRE's Guide to Free Speech on Campus. He testified before the United States Congress on a state of free speech on college campuses, and he appeared in the films Brainwashing 101 and Indoctrinate You on the same topic, letter U. He has made numerous appearances on nationally syndicated television shows. He's also appeared on various news shows, including Stossel on more than one occasion, before joining FIRE. Lukianoff worked for the American Civil Liberties Union of Northern California, the Organization for Aid to Refugees, and Environmentors Project. He lives in New York City. Lukianoff is the co-author with Jonathan Haidt, were awarded the Hugh M. Hefner First Amendment Award in 2019 for their book, The Coddling of the American Mind. He served as executive producer in the 2015 documentary about censorship in comedy, Can We Take a Joke?, and the 2020 free speech documentary about former ACLU executive director Ira Glasser, Mighty Ira. So, obviously, free speech advocate. He worked for the American Civil Liberties Union before they got shitty. I'm here for it. So we'll talk a little bit about this book. I have not really cracked it open yet. I wanted to go in raw. So thought about not saying it, decided to say it. It's horrible. So we're gonna read the front cover, and then we'll do page and pace. Why I picked this book. We'll talk about that first. Why did I pick this book? I had this book on my shelf already, and I tried to do that with a bunch of the books that I had, make it easier on myself, but also it's the Coddling of the American Mind. What do we talk about so much in this show? People being sensitive. We need to be able to have difficult discussions. We need to be able to be uncomfortable in order to try and be able to strive for progress. So college campuses, being that I'm 27 years old, Colin is not too much older than I am. He's like 28. It matters to us the mental state of people coming out of college, because those are the people that we're interacting with regularly. Those are the people that Colin is hiring for his job, the people of that age that are coming in there. If they have compromised ideologies, we need to know that. He needs to know that. It's important for us to know things as we continue this venture and we look to adding employees into our venture. It's important for us to know that. What is the general state of the mind of people coming out of college? That's important to know. And it affects us as a society. That is the next generation. Those are the people that are going into filling every job that old people are in right now. That matters, right? And if these institutions are filled with Marxism and sensitivity, boiled down to very two simple points. But if it's filled with that and many, many other terrible aspects, we are doomed again as a society. So I didn't think about this before, but this is probably a good thing to come off of from Rubicon, that we can look to what some of the modern day problems are, and it sounds like some ways that we can fix them. So page and pace real quick. I'll pull up my calculator and we'll go through the page and pace. May has 31 days in it. And so let's see. Calculator, there is always the notes and the citations. References, notes. At least we know it's well researched. Notes. Okay. Appendix 2, Jesus. Acknowledgements. Wiser Societies, 269. Okay. 269 divided by 31. That is only 8.6 pages a day, baby. We were on like 12.2 or something on the last book. We're cutting 4 daily pages out, my G. This is going to be great. So, 8.6 pages a day. That's also 8 and 21 31sts, according to 31sts? 31st, 21 31st. I don't know how you get to that type of fraction, but my calculator did it. So just make sure that you're drawing really fine lines on those pages so you don't read 22 31sts. Okay, so this is the front cover. Also, this book costs $28 US and 37 Canadian. So I think that I tried to keep all these under $30 to keep it pretty easy. Again, I will say again, if anyone needs help getting a book, let me know. Let me know and I will hook you up. Okay, front cover. Something has been going wrong on many college campuses in the last few years. Speakers are shouted down. Students and professors say they are walking on eggshells and are afraid to speak honestly. Rates of anxiety, depression, and suicide are rising on campus as well as nationally. How did this happen? First Amendment expert Greg Lukianoff and social psychologist Jonathan Haidt show how the new problems on campus have their origins in 3 terrible ideas that have become increasingly woven into American childhood and education. What doesn't kill you makes you weaker. Always trust your feelings, and life is a battle between good people and evil people. These 3 great untruths contradict basic psychological principles about well-being and ancient wisdom from many cultures. Embracing these untruths and the resulting culture of safetyism interferes with younger people's social, emotional, and intellectual development. It makes it harder for them to become autonomous adults who are able to navigate the bumpy road of life. Lukianoff and Haidt investigate the many social trends that have intersected to promote the spread of these untruths. They explore changes in childhood, such as the rise of fearful parenting, the decline of unsupervised child-directed play, and the new world of social media that has engulfed teenagers in the last decade. They examine changes on campus, including the corporatization of universities and the emergence of new ideas about identity and justice. They situate the conflicts on campus within the context of America's rapidly rising political polarization and dysfunction. This is a book for anyone who's confused by what is happening on college campuses today, or as children, or is concerned about the growing inability of Americans to live, work, and cooperate across party lines. So, I think this book is going to be incredible. I think it is going to run straight up the alley of... I can't say that. I can't say it's going to run up our alleys. I cannot say it's going to run up our alleys. That was close. So I think this book is going to be really good. I think it's going to be right in the wheelhouse of both Colin and I and this show in itself. And I think that we're all going to really enjoy it. Live streams are going to be incredible. Ooh, that's the last thing. We will talk about the live stream dates for May. I knew there was a reason I had my calendar here. Let's see. The first is a Sunday. Okay, we'll do 3. I think we'll do 3. Yeah, okay. So the first one is going to be on the 5th, right? It's the 5th. The next one is going to be on the 12th. The third one is going to be on the 19th, right? 5th, 12th, 19th. Those will be the live streams for the month of May for the Coddling of the American Mind. May is the day or the month that the baby is due. So these live streams and things, we're going to kind of play them by ear and see what's up with them. We may end up having like a live stream review preview or something next month, depending on when the baby gets here. The due date is the 30th, and as you know, these come out on the 1st, so we'll see what happens. Jordan's expecting the baby's gonna get here early, but we'll kind of play all of that by ears. So with that, I want to thank you guys because I think this has been a great review preview. I really, really hope that you enjoyed this. If you have any questions, if you have any disagreements, or if you agree with me, if you think there's legitimacy to the theory that I laid out here, let me know. Share this with your friends. Tell everyone about it. Read this book. Share the book with your friends because I think it's very, very important. It was a very good story. For me, it took a little bit to get into, but once I was into it, I was here for it. I got a little bit tortured and dragged down by it because I had to crush 200 pages in like 6 days. So I was a little bogged down at the end, but had I not been under that type of pressure, I think I would have really, really, really enjoyed this book. So I recommend it for anybody who's into history. I recommend it to anybody who's wondering why things are happening in this country. And with that, I want to thank you one last time for joining me here on the review preview for Salt of the Streets. My name is Donavan. You've been watching us on our YouTube, youtube.com/Salt of the Streets. We also have our Patreon. Obviously, go to the Patreon. Most of you are on the Patreon. If you're watching this, go to the Patreon, sign up, help us make more, better content, just like this, more stuff just like this. You can find all this on saltofthestreets.com, including our own personal social media. I am at Salt of the Street on Twitter and at alpaca_Donovan on Instagram. Colin is at Big Bird Alfie on both of those things. Thank you guys very much. Keep booking it up.
Welcome to the Salt of the Streets, coming at you every week with this food for thought. Hope you ready.